What NDA secrets can you now reveal? I used to work as a security guard in a big building. One night, something really strange happened. It was 2 a.m. when a plain van showed up. 2 men got out and had to prove who they were using special machines that checked their bodies. They also had to tell me a secret password. Then, I had to do something I'd never done before. I turned off all the cameras in the building where these men were going to walk. I also had to erase the video of them coming in and leaving. It was easy to do because we used old tape cameras. The men brought in some vases. But these weren't normal vases. They took them to a special locked room that hardly anyone could go into. I didn't know what was in those vases, but it must have been really important. I've seen trucks full of gold and silver come into the building before, and they didn't have nearly as much security as these vases did. It was all very mysterious, and I still wonder what was so special about those vases. But I'd promised not to tell anyone about it for a long time. Now that I can talk about it, it's fun to share this weird story from my old job. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like us to create more of this content. Thank you. Story 2. I used to work at this pharmacy chain, and let me tell you, the threat of being robbed for our opiates was always hanging over our heads. It was pretty scary stuff. They drilled it into us. If a robber ever shows up demanding drugs, just hand them over, no questions asked. But here's the thing. I heard these wild stories about pharmacists who tried to be heroes. Instead of giving the robbers the real oxy, they'd slip them bottles filled with Tylenol. Can you believe that? I mean, I get wanting to stop the bad guys, but that's just reckless. What if the robbers figure out they've been tricked? They could come back seriously pissed off, you know? Anyway, the higher-ups must have been freaking out about all this, because they came up with this crazy new policy. Top secret stuff. We all had to sign NDAs and everything. So here's the deal. They started putting the heavy-duty opiates in these special safes. Right. But these weren't just any safes. They had GPS trackers hidden inside, with a charger and all. The idea was, if someone swiped the drugs, the safe would keep tabs on their location. As soon as it got too far from the pharmacy, bam, it would send out an alert to this third-party company. Those guys would be on it like hawks, working with the cops to hunt down the thieves. It was a pretty wild setup, let me tell you. I never thought I'd see the day when we'd be using spy tech to protect pills. But, hey, desperate times call for desperate measures, I guess. All I know is, it sure made working at the pharmacy a lot more intense. Story 3. I'm not entirely sure if the things I saw during my time in Iraq are okay to talk about now, so I'll have to be a bit vague on the details. But there's a couple of things that still haunt me to this day. For one, we were tasked with arming and training some local militia groups to help fight against ISIS. The higher-ups were desperate for boots on the ground for the siege of Mosul, so they didn't seem too picky about who they were giving guns to. These guys, though, a lot of them had some pretty shady motives, if you ask me. It felt like we were just handing out weapons to any group that promised to point them in the right direction, without really checking them out first. I couldn't shake this feeling that if we didn't need these guys as cannon fodder, we might end up having to bomb or drone strike them ourselves down the line. It was a real mess, let me tell you. But that's not even the weirdest thing. One time, we had this bomb-sniffing dog with us, and he starts going crazy around this one truck. So we pull the driver out and start searching the vehicle, and that's when we see it. The truck is just covered in human brain matter, from the bed all the way to the hood. Now, I've seen my fair share of violence out there. I know what it looks like when someone takes a bullet to the head. But this was something else entirely. There had to be the brains of 5 or 6 people splattered all over that truck. It was like a scene straight out of a horror movie. We're getting ready to really tear the truck apart and grill this guy when all of a sudden we get a call on the radio telling us to stand down and let him go. I couldn't believe it. This dude is just sitting there, grinning at us like it's no big deal that he's driving around in a vehicle that looks like a slaughterhouse on wheels. As he's leaving, he actually has the nerve to give me a pack of cigarettes and thank us for being welcome guests in his country. He's acting all friendly, saying he understands how bad it must look, but that he hopes we have a nice day. Then he just drives off, like nothing ever happened. To this day, I have no clue what that was all about. The whole thing still gives me the creeps. It's just one of those weird, messed up things that you see out there that you can't quite wrap your head around, you know? Story 4. Working at a Native American casino was a real eye-opener, let me tell you. From the outside, it all looks so glamorous and profitable, but behind the scenes, it's a different story altogether. Take the golf courses, for example. You think they'd be a big moneymaker, right? Wrong. Those things were bleeding us dry. We poured so much cash into maintaining them and running ads, but the returns just weren't there. It was a constant headache for the higher-ups. The food was another issue. Sure, we had some great restaurants, but when you factor in all the comped meals we had to give out, we were basically just breaking even. It's all part of the casino game, I guess. But here's where things get really interesting. If the casino suspected that a dealer was cheating or stealing, they wouldn't just fire them on the spot. Oh no, they had a much more calculated approach. They'd put the dealer under surveillance for a full 3 months, watching their every move. The casino had this sophisticated facial recognition system that could track players and match them up with dealers. So if they noticed the same player sitting down with the same dealer over and over again, they'd start getting suspicious. They figured that if a dealer was cheating, they probably had an accomplice among the players. Once they had enough evidence, they'd finally make their move. But they wouldn't just slap the cuffs on you and call it a day. No, they had this whole psychological warfare thing going on. They'd sit you down in a room and make you watch a video of yourself breaking the law, caught red-handed on camera. The idea was to break you down, to make you realise that you were busted and there was no way out. They wanted you to plead guilty and save them the hassle and expense of a trial. It was all very calculated and kind of creepy, if you ask me. But I guess that's just the way things work in the casino world. It's all about protecting their bottom line, no matter what it takes. And if that means spending months spying on their own employees, well, so be it. Story 5. You'd think that a global conferencing company, of all places, would have their cybersecurity game on point. But let me tell you, the things I've seen would make your jaw drop. First of all, this company still saves passwords for their web products in plain text. Yes, you read that right. In the year 2021, they're still using a security practice that went out of style with flip phones and frosted tips. And here's the kicker. Any employee, and I mean any employee, can see those passwords. It's like they're just begging for a data breach. When I found out about this, I changed my password to "not my pass, you idiot," because I knew it was only a matter of time before someone else laid eyes on it. And you know what? People actually had the nerve to comment and laugh about it. Like, hey guys, maybe focus on fixing the gaping security hole instead of chuckling at my password. But that's not even the worst of it. We once discovered that our main conferencing software was letting people sign in regardless of the password they entered. You could literally type in password 123 or "I love cats" and still gain access to any account as long as you had the email address. It was like the digital equivalent of leaving your front door wide open with a neon sign that said, "Come on in." When we brought this massive flaw to the attention of the higher-ups, they immediately went into damage control mode. They told us not to breathe a word of it in writing, as if that would somehow make the problem disappear. Then, they got the dev team and legal department on a conference call. Ironic, right? And decided the best course of action was to just sweep it under the rug until they could patch it up later that day. Did they inform any of the clients whose accounts were at risk? Of course not. That would be too logical. Instead, they gave the ones who knew about the issue the runaround until they got tired of asking. It was like watching a masterclass in how not to handle a security crisis. But wait, there's more. They also thought it would be a great idea to add call spoofing to the software. Sure, they gave it a fancy name, but let's call a spade a spade. This feature allowed users to make calls and disguise their number as any other number they wanted. When my team raised concerns about the potential for abuse, we were brushed off with a flippant, "No one will actually use it for that." Right, because no one has ever used technology for nefarious purposes before. That place was a veritable goldmine of security risks, and I'm honestly surprised they haven't made headlines for a major data breach yet. It just goes to show that even the biggest, most well-known companies can have some seriously questionable practices going on behind the scenes. Story 6. When I started my job at 22, I never imagined I'd have to deal with something like this. My boss, a married lesbian woman, seemed to think that personal boundaries and professional conduct were optional when it came to our working relationship. It all came to a head at a conference when she got drunk and tried to climb into my hotel bed. I was already uncomfortable enough being forced to share a room with her, but when she declared our room a pants-free zone, after 9 p.m, I knew things had gone way too far. As if that wasn't bad enough, she pulled another stunt at a baseball game in front of our co-workers and clients. Drunk once again, she tried to switch shirts with me, like we were sorority sisters at a frat party instead of colleagues at a professional event. I couldn't take it anymore. I quit, because no job is worth sacrificing my dignity and sense of safety. But apparently, my boss wasn't done with me yet. She left me a voicemail that I'll never forget. In a slurred, angry rant, she called me a 22-year-old little bitch and insisted that what she did wasn't sexual harassment because she was a woman. It was like she had completely forgotten that lesbians exist and that she herself was one. And not even a closeted one, but a full-on, married to a woman lesbian. Her message only served to fuel my determination. I may have been young, but I wasn't about to let her get away with such blatant harassment and dismissal of my feelings. I decided to take legal action. To my surprise, the company settled within 2 months, agreeing to pay me a full year's salary and cover my legal fees. It was a validating moment, knowing that even though my boss had tried to minimize my experience, the powers that be recognized the severity of her actions. Story 7. About 15 years ago, I was interviewing with this company that claimed they were working on a new design for a public toilet that was going to change everything. Spoiler alert, it didn't. So here's what they had in mind. Picture 2 toilets, back to back, like some sort of bizarre bathroom yin-yang. The idea was that one toilet would rotate up into the wall, where it would undergo a thorough cleaning, while the other toilet, which had just been used, would rotate down to take its place. It was like a never-ending carousel of toilets, swapping places for their turn in the magical cleaning chamber. But wait, it gets better. Instead of your standard toilet bowl filled with water, these toilets would have a conveyor belt at the bottom. Yep, you read that right. A conveyor belt, like the ones you see at the grocery store checkout, except instead of transporting your frozen peas and potato chips, it would be carrying away your... well, you get the idea. The company claimed this would make the toilets clog-free. I guess they never considered the possibility of a different kind of clog that might occur when you combine human waste with a moving platform. Now, I'm no toilet tycoon, but even I could see that this idea was a total flush. I politely declined their job offer, but not before sending them a 2 or 3 page email detailing all the ways their grand plan could go down the drain. First of all, Can you imagine the liability nightmare if that auto-swapping mechanism accidentally activated while someone was still doing their business? 1 minute you're sitting there, minding your own business, and the next, you're being rotated up into the wall like some sort of twisted magic trick gone wrong. And let's talk about the cost. I mean, how much more expensive would this contraption be compared to a regular, tried and true porcelain throne? I'm no plumber, but I'm pretty sure installing a rotating toilet system with a built-in conveyor belt and cleaning chamber would require a bit more than your average wax ring and a few bolts. Which brings me to my next point. Retrofitting. Can you picture the logistical nightmare of trying to cram all this extra machinery and plumbing into existing bathroom stalls? It would be like trying to stuff a clown car full of circus performers into a broom closet. And don't even get me started on the conveyor belt situation. How in the world do you plan on keeping that thing clean when it's been exposed to, well, you know, it's not like you can just hose it down and call it a day. Finally, let's address the elephant in the room. Or, should I say, the smell in the stall. Without the trusty water barrier that you get with a regular toilet, what's to stop the sewer gases from wafting back up through that open pipe? I don't know about you, but I prefer my public restrooms to have a slightly less authentic aroma. Needless to say, I never heard back from the company after sending that email. And now, almost 15 years later, it seems like they've gone the way of their ill-fated invention. Straight down the drain. I guess some ideas are just too crappy to succeed, no matter how much you try to polish them. Story 8. Let me tell you about the time I got to work as a fit model for Katy Perry's shoe line. It was a pretty sweet gig, but I had to sign an NDA, so I couldn't really talk about it until now. So, what's a fit model, you ask? Basically, it's someone with good proportions who tries on clothes or shoes to help designers perfect the fit. Lucky for me, I have the most average feet in the world. A perfect size 7.5. Who knew being so ordinary would actually pay off? Anyway, I got hired to try on shoes for Katy Perry's line on 2 separate occasions. The first time I showed up thinking it would just be me and some designers, maybe a few assistants. Boy, was I in for a surprise. As soon as I walked in, there was Katy herself, totally in charge and running the whole show. She was super nice and down to earth, not at all what you might expect from a big celebrity. She asked for my honest opinion on the fit, feel and comfort of each pair of shoes I tried on. It was kind of surreal, sitting there chatting with Katy Perry about arch support and toe room. The second time I went in, I wasn't sure if she'd even remember me, but as soon as she saw me, her face lit up with recognition. "Hey, it's you again," she said, flashing me a big smile. "Thanks so much for coming back." I couldn't believe she actually remembered me. That meeting was supposed to start earlier in the day, but Katy had been held up shooting a music video. By the time I got there, it was pretty late at night. I thought maybe she'd be tired or cranky after such a long day, but she was just as warm and friendly as ever. She even apologised for making me wait so long, which I thought was really thoughtful of her. Oh, and I can't forget about her adorable dog. That little furball was running around the studio, bringing smiles to everyone's faces. At one point, the poor thing managed to get itself stuck behind a wall panel. Without thinking, I rushed over and carefully extracted the pup from its predicament. Katy was so grateful, thanking me for being her dog's hero. Story 9. I used to work for this recycling company, thinking I was doing my part to help the environment. But let me tell you, the reality was a far cry from the eco-friendly image they portrayed. For starters, the amount of stuff they just threw away in the trash was staggering. You'd think a recycling company would be all about reducing waste, but nope. They were more interested in collecting those sweet government subsidies than actually making a difference. Meanwhile, US employees were left to work in this hazardous hellhole for a measly paycheck safety regulations. More like safety suggestions. One of the worst parts was sorting through the materials. You never knew what you might find in there. I'm talking dirty syringes, people. It's a miracle I didn't get stabbed by one. Can you imagine the fear of contracting some horrible disease, all because your job is to sift through other people's garbage? But it's not just the workers who suffer. The environmental impact of this so-called recycling is just as bad, if not worse, than if the stuff ended up in a landfill. The ships they use to transport the material spew out emissions like there's no tomorrow. It's like they're saying, sure, we'll recycle your plastic, but we'll pollute the air in the process. You're welcome, Earth. It's enough to make you lose faith in the whole system. I mean, what can we do as individuals to make a difference when the very companies meant to help are just making things worse? Composting at home and reducing your own waste is great, but it feels like a drop in the bucket compared to the massive scale of the problem. I know a big part of the issue is that other countries have cheaper labour, so it's more profitable to ship our waste overseas than to deal with it responsibly here. It's a double-edged sword, for sure. On one hand, you want to create jobs and support developing economies, but on the other, you don't want to do it at the expense of people's health and the planet's future. I wish I had all the answers, but I don't. All I know is that my experience working for that recycling company opened my eyes to the ugly truth behind the green facade. It's not enough to just go through the motions of recycling. We need to demand real change from the top down if we want to make a difference. But until then, I guess I'll just keep doing my part, one compost bin at a time. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us speak out and demand better, we can start to turn this ship around before it's too late. Story 10. My great-grandfather was a true survivor. During World War II, he found himself in a harrowing situation when his airplane was partially destroyed over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. With only a wing and a half remaining, he managed to get back to base safely. When asked how he did it, he simply said, "I couldn't swim." That was the kind of man he was, determined and unflappable in the face of danger. After the war, it seemed like his luck only got better. He married my great-grandmother and then, incredibly, won the lottery. We're talking a couple $1 million, which was a fortune back then. It was like the universe was rewarding him for all the hardships he had endured. But fate can be cruel, and his lucky streak came to a tragic end when I was just 2 years old. A pharmacist made a terrible mistake with his prescription, mixing up his medication in the worst possible way. Instead of giving him the blood thinner he needed, they gave him a clotting aid. Within hours of taking the wrong meds, my great-grandfather dropped dead. My great-grandmother was devastated, but she was also determined to hold the pharmacy accountable for their fatal error. She didn't care about getting a payout. She wanted justice for her beloved husband. She hired a lawyer and prepared to fight tooth and nail. But even with all the money from the lottery winnings, the lawyer had to give her a grim reality check. He told her something like, "Look, even with all your winnings here, you can't afford this. You're absolutely right. But they will outspend you until you can't afford the fight anymore. It's not right, it's not fair. But you will lose over money alone. I'd recommend taking your money, setting up a nice retirement, and trying to enjoy the rest of your life." It was a bitter pill to swallow, realising that justice had a price tag, and it was one that even a lottery winner couldn't afford. The system was rigged in favour of those with deep pockets, and my great-grandmother had no choice but to back down. In the end, she took her lawyer's advice. She used the money to set up a comfortable retirement and made the most of the years she had left. Every other summer, she would take my grandparents and my parents on wonderful cruises, creating cherished memories that would last a lifetime. Story 11. A couple of years ago, I had a brief stint as a QA tester at EA, working on a project that I wasn't allowed to talk about at the time, the console port of The Sims 4. It was all very hush-hush, but now that the game has been out for a while, I figure it's safe to share a few stories from my experience. When I was there, the console port was still in its very early stages. Basically, they were just running the PC version on a console, which, as you can imagine, led to a whole host of bugs and issues. One of the most memorable was a lighting glitch that we affectionately dubbed disco mode. It caused a bunch of multicolored lights to flash and flicker erratically, turning the usually tranquil world of The Sims into a chaotic, impromptu rave. Of course, most of the problems I encountered were far less entertaining. A lot of my time was spent logging bugs like I can't put sinks on counters or the curtains are floating 3 feet off the ground. It was a reminder that game development is a long and meticulous process, with countless little details that need to be ironed out before the final product is ready for players. One of the biggest challenges at that stage was the lack of a proper console control scheme. The dev team hadn't implemented gamepad support yet, so we were stuck using the control stick to move the cursor around. It was like trying to play a PC game with a joystick. Clunky, imprecise, and frustrating at times. But hey, that's what we were there for, to help identify these issues so they could be fixed before release. Story 12. When you think of working for a tech giant like Google, you probably imagine a world of endless perks, job security, and prestige. But for many of their contract employees, the reality is far less glamorous. You see, Google doesn't actually hire direct support employees. Instead, they open up these small projects in the US, bringing on up to 250 contract workers for various support positions. At first, it seems like a dream come true. You're working for Google after all. But little do you know, you're just a cog in a much larger, less sympathetic machine. Once Google gets all the stats and data they need to run everything efficiently, the axe falls. Mass layoffs sweep through the ranks, leaving countless contract employees out in the cold. And where do their jobs go? Straight to countries like the Philippines or India, where workers are willing to accept a fraction of what their US counterparts were making. Meanwhile, Google is raking in huge tax cuts for creating jobs in local communities, even as they're shipping those very same jobs overseas. It's a bitter pill to swallow for those who believe they had finally landed their dream gig. In my ex's department, they used to call layoff days D days. Every time one rolled around, people would be holding their breath, wondering if they'd still have a job by the end of it. If you made it through unscathed, it was a pleasant surprise. Some lucky folks managed to migrate to other projects, but the writing was always on the wall. It was only a matter of time before their jobs would be outsourced too. My ex worked for Google Fiber, which I think is their Wi-Fi service or something. I'm not too sure, since it's not available where we live. He put in over 40 hours every week, consistently got great reviews, and really believed he was on the path to something big. But when his contract came up for renewal, Google showed him the door. He managed to convince them to sign him back on through the outsourcing company, but it was all downhill from there. The layoffs started happening left and right, and he'd come home with stories about how so-and-so got fired because their performance reviews weren't up to snuff. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, knowing that eventually it would be his turn. By the time we broke up, he was still clinging to that job, but I heard he finally quit and now works at a Staples. I guess it's good that he got out, but it's a far cry from the bright future he thought Google would provide. Story 13. When I was little, I had to go to the dentist because I had a cavity. I wasn't scared because I liked my dentist and I was always trying to be good. They even gave me special air that made me feel silly and relaxed. But something went wrong that day. While the dentist was fixing my tooth, his drill slipped and made a hole under my tongue. My mum saw me jump a little, but the dentist just said he nicked me and there might be a little blood. When we got home, things got really scary. My neck puffed up like a big frog, and my voice got all squeaky. It turns out there was a pocket of air pushing on my heart, and it was dirty air from my mouth. I had to go to the hospital right away. The doctors said I was very, very sick. Almost as sick as you can get without dying. It was really scary for me and my mum. After I got better, my mum tried to make the dentist pay for what happened, but he told a big lie. He said I was kicking and screaming during the appointment, which wasn't true at all. He even got his helper at the office to say the same thing. My mum's lawyer told her it would be hard, to win against the dentist. So she agreed to keep quiet about what happened in exchange for some money. Now, we can't tell anyone who the dentist was. It makes me sad because we've heard that this dentist has hurt other people's teeth too. We talked to other lawyers later, and they said we probably could have won if we tried harder. It's frustrating that we can't warn people about this dentist, but at least now I can share my story to help others be careful. Story 14. I once worked for a company that was involved in filming a popular reality TV show about finding love. It was eye-opening to see how these shows are really made. Before filming started, we had meetings with our bosses. They told us it was important to keep everything we saw a secret. We even had to sign papers saying we wouldn't talk about it. What surprised me most was how fake everything was. The show wasn't real at all. The main person on the show seemed more interested in becoming famous than actually finding love. Before they filmed each scene, the crew would set everything up. They told the people on the show where to go and what to do. It was like watching a play being rehearsed. When the cameras weren't rolling, nothing exciting was happening. The people on the show would often be on their phones, probably texting their friends and family back home. I've heard similar stories from other reality shows too. One person I know was on a different show for just 2 days. She said the producers tried to get her to say things she didn't mean, like how she was in love with someone she'd just met. When she wouldn't do it, they sent her home and didn't even show her on TV. It made me realise that what we see on reality TV often isn't reality at all. It's more like a story that's been made up to look real. Now, when I watch these shows, I always wonder what's actually true and what's been set up for the cameras. Story 15. I used to be a model for some big makeup companies. Yeah, the ones you've definitely heard of. I did lots of ads in magazines and even showed up in a few TV commercials. It was exciting, but it wasn't all glitz and glamour like you might think. Let me tell you something about those makeup ads you see everywhere. The stuff they're trying to sell you, they do use it, but only a tiny bit. It's pretty sneaky actually. Take mascara for example. In the ads, my eyelashes looked amazing, right? Well, here's the truth. Most of that was fake eyelashes. Really good ones too. Then they'd put on some mascara from another brand. And finally, they'd add a little of the one they wanted you to buy. But it's not just the makeup that's tricky. Remember those clothes I wore in the ads? They looked perfect on me, didn't they? Well, guess what? They were pinned and tucked all over the place. The clothes didn't really fit like that at all. There was so much double-sided tape and so many safety pins holding everything together. It was crazy. I want you to know that when us models wear those clothes without all the tricks, we look just like anyone else. It's not your body that's the problem. It's the fake way they show clothes in ads. Story 16. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but it's time people knew the truth about the moving business. I used to work for a company in the Middle East that helped Americans move. We had a bunch of different names. 9 actually. And we'd change them whenever too many people started complaining about us. Our company was pretty sneaky. We had people whose job was just to write good reviews about us every day to cover up all the bad ones. I worked in sales, and my job was to make promises we couldn't keep. I'd tell people we had professional movers with all the right tools and training. I'd promise great prices and quick deliveries. But it was all a lie. On moving day, things were totally different from what we promised. The trucks that showed up often had no company name on them, or sometimes a completely different name. The workers were usually immigrants who didn't have any experience moving stuff. They were paid in cash, which isn't really legal. The moves took way longer than we said they would, and people's things often got lost. That's because we'd put a bunch of different people's stuff in the same truck without labelling things properly. When too many people complain, we'd just change our company name and start over. I learned that moving is a really tough business, and there are a lot of people trying to cheat others. If you're planning to move, don't try to save money by going with the cheapest option. It's worth spending more to know your stuff is safe. My advice: find a local moving company if you can. Go meet the people who work there and make sure they're real. It's even better if they can come to your house to look at your stuff before giving you a price. Even if it costs more than what you see online, it's worth it for peace of mind. After that job, I worked for another moving company in Canada. It was a big American company with about 400 locations. I thought it would be better, but it was just as corrupt. The owner of our branch started paying us in weird ways, saying there was a problem with the normal system. But really, he was trying to avoid paying taxes. He also started hiring people who had just moved to the country and didn't have the right papers to work. It was all pretty shady. Story 17. When I was younger, I got a job working on the trading floor at Goldman Sachs. It was exciting to be part of such a big, important company. My job gave me access to all the trading accounts and transactions. I felt pretty important, looking at all those numbers and records every day. One day, something strange caught my eye. I noticed some accounts that didn't look right. They didn't have clear names, and I couldn't find any records of how they were created or tested. This was weird because usually every account had a clear history. I thought I should tell someone about it, so I went to my supervisor. I asked him if I should look into these odd accounts. His response surprised me. He turned to me and said, "We don't ask about those accounts. Just ignore them. Orders from the top." I was confused. I knew that making a new trading account was supposed to be a big deal. It needed approval from lots of different managers and had to follow strict rules. But these accounts, they didn't follow any of the rules. They were like ghosts in the system, trading lots of money without leaving a trace. My supervisor told me to pretend I didn't see them. It felt wrong, but I was new and didn't want to cause trouble. So I did what he said and tried to forget about it. Looking back, I realised how strange and scary that situation was. It made me wonder what else was happening behind the scenes at the bank. Sometimes I still think about those mysterious accounts and wonder who was using them and why they were allowed to break all the rules. Story 18. I want to tell you about my dad and his strange job. Back in the 1960s, he did some secret work for the government. He had to sign a paper saying he wouldn't talk about it for his whole life. That's called an NDA, which means non-disclosure agreement. The weird thing is, my dad never told anyone what he did. But the NDA had some strange rules. It said he couldn't use certain words ever again. Some of these words were pretty normal, so it was kind of obvious which ones he couldn't say. For example, he couldn't say words like ball or balloon. He also couldn't say briefcase, bomb, or nuclear. It was funny sometimes because he'd find other ways to say these things. Instead of saying, "there's a balloon," he'd say something like, "there's an inflatable latex object." It sounded silly, but he had to follow the rules. As time went on, my dad slowly started using some of these words again. But he never talked about the NDA or his secret job. Even though he's not alive anymore, I still wonder what he did that was so secret. He couldn't even say normal words. It's interesting to think about what kind of work would make the government tell someone not to use everyday words. I guess some secrets are just that important to keep. Story 19. I have a friend who works in distilleries, checking to make sure the drinks are made right. He told me something surprising about fancy spirits that I want to share with you. You know how we think expensive spirits are made with care in small batches? Well, that's not always true. A lot of the time, it's done very differently. Here's what really happens. Big train cars, full of alcohol made from grain, arrive at the distillery. They make this alcohol stronger and then mix it with sweet corn syrup and flavours. They don't use fancy equipment to mix it all together. Instead, they use big plastic boxes and stir everything with a drill and a stick like you'd use to mix paint. And just like that, they've made what they call high-end gin. They might sell it for $90 a bottle, but you're not paying for a special drink. You're paying for all the ads that make you think it's special. Now, this isn't true for every single spirit out there. Some places do make their drinks the old-fashioned way. But a lot of cheaper spirits are made like this. Even some expensive brands do it too, because most people can't tell the difference. Story 20. I used to work behind the scenes on the popular MTV show Room Raiders. Everything you saw on that show was completely staged. The items they found in the contestants' rooms were all planted there by my team. Even the date at the end of the show was just a sham, as the winner didn't actually get to go on a date with the person they picked. They just got their phone number. I was what they called the dedicated semen planter, or DSP in industry lingo. It was grueling work, but someone had to do it. I'd get calls at all hours, sometimes 2 a.m. the day of a shoot, with an address, time, and a minimum liquid volume quota I had to meet. The job involved a lot of odd tasks: lifting mattresses, folding and unfolding towels, emptying and refilling sock drawers, even carrying ladders up several flights of stairs just to get that signature ceiling shot. The casting team was always looking for attention to detail. One trick I developed was using a small hairdryer to bake the deposits into the fabric to get that perfect stiff, crusty look. It was exhausting, chafing work. I'd go home sore, dehydrated, and hoping the phone wouldn't ring for at least 2 days. If I missed a shoot, I'd be fired on the spot. The industry had a lot of turnover for this kind of job. My NDA expired back in April, so I can finally tell people the truth about what really went on behind the scenes of Room Raiders. It's not a glamorous job, but someone had to do it. Thanks for listening to these regrettable recaps. Please like and subscribe if you'd like more of this content in the future. And watch the video that's on your screen now for more regrettable recaps.